Hello, BookTube, and welcome to another weekly reading vlog. I'm still working on these three books here. I'll try and go through these relatively quickly. So, Captain America, still plodding my way through this. I read from pages 100 to 126 this past week. Now, of course, these are comic book pages, so I don't expect a lot of credit for those page counts, but these are the old Stan Lee era of Marvel Comics was fairly talky. As I mentioned last week, I'm not finding these great. I mean, I know the golden age of Stan Lee is infamous in comic book legend, but finding it a little bit tiresome. But there are some nice images here. So this is Captain America comics published in the mid 60s, but which are flashback scenes to World War II, which was when Captain America originated. There's an interesting conversation to be had maybe about the way World War II was used for pulp fiction in the 1960s in a way that it would be considered taboo today. Would be considered irreverent today to the Holocaust victims and all the other people who died. But it is, the imagery is good, kind of. Well, I mean, we've got a Nazi doctor hiding in a castle in Europe, having captured Bucky, and it's a Nazi doctor who has a middle hand. So it's kind of like all the images there of classic pulp fiction there. So some of that's all right. The dialogue and the pacing and the plotting and a lot of the resolutions to these stories are always underwhelming. It's always just a fight scene. But yeah, it's all right. And then Journey to the West. So I read this week from page 14 to page 40. This is a library book here, and actually the book ended up being due on Friday. So I had to renew it, which wasn't a big problem. Now, this is volume 2 of 4. Originally, I had checked out all 4 volumes and still not finished with volume 2 by the time they were due. So I renewed volume 2 and I just returned volumes 3 and 4 to the library. The reason I wanted to check them all out at once was just extra insurance against somebody else checking them out or them getting lost and not being able to finish it. But I've decided I'm reading this slow enough that I can't justify just holding on to all of them. So, I mean, not that anyone's going to want volumes 3 and 4 when I have volume 2, but I return them to the library. And once I finish volume 2, I will check out volume 3. And if it happens to be missing from the library, I guess I'll just take a break from this. But yeah, the story this week. So the part I left off last week is they're in a country where the king is giving preferential treatment to the Taoist monks, and the Buddhist monks are working as slave labor. And the Taoist monks are having a feast, and the monkey and the pig and Friar Sand go in and once the Taoist monks have left the hall, they disguise themselves as the statues. I believe in last week's weekly reading vlog, I said I think these were Buddhist deities that they disguised themselves as, and then questioned why the Buddhist deities would be in the Taoist hall and said I didn't really understand it. Now I'm not sure, actually, after having read this chapter. Maybe they're Taoist deities, or maybe they're just... I get the impression that the Empire of Heaven, the Jade Emperor of Heaven, is something neither Taoist nor Buddhist, but kind of this super Chinese mythology which overlays both of it. So maybe they're from the Jade Emperor of Heaven, the Heavenly Empire. I don't know. But anyways, the three statues, and the monkey gets the pig to put the statues in the lavatory, and then they disguise themselves as the statues and eat the food. And then when the monks come back, the Taoist monks, they see that the food has been eaten, and then the monkey and the pig and Friar Sand, who are still disguised as these statues of deities, say, "Oh, it was us who ate it." And the Taoists thinks that they're immortals from heaven, and begs for them to give them some immortal water while they're there, so that they could drink it and get long life and give it to the king and get favor. And as soon as they said they want immortal water from the deities, I thought to myself, oh, I hope this isn't going where I think it's going to go. Because there has already been some precedent in this series for some humor related around bodily functions. Shit and piss, to put it crassly. But it's that kind of crass book at points. So I thought, I think I know where this is going to go, and I really hope it doesn't go there. And sure enough, it went there. The monkey and the pig and Friar Sand piss into this cup and give it to the Taoists as the immortal water, and the Taoists drink it, and they're like, oh, this tastes like monkey piss or like pig piss. And then they just laugh at them. So then they fly away on their clouds, and then the monkey and the pig and Friar Sand with this monk. And by the way, I forgot to mention this, but the frame story around all of this is monk traveling to India to get the Buddhist scriptures, accompanied by a monkey and a pig and a couple other companions. They have to go to the king to get their exit visas out of this land. And the king is going to give them their exit visas when the Taoist monks show up and complain about them. And then they agree. At this time, a messenger comes in and says that the citizens are really angry because are really concerned because they haven't got rain. Now, the reason that the Taoist monks are so favored in this kingdom in the first place is because some years ago they were able to bring rain when the Buddhist monks were not, during a drought. So they propose that they have a little pray-off. So the Taoist monks will pray for rain, and then the Buddhist monk will pray for rain, and they'll see where the rain comes from. Which reminded me, of course, of those stories from the Old Testament about Elijah versus the prophets of Baal, right? Where they're both praying to their respective gods about who is going to light the altar. Here they're praying for rain, but kind of a similar setup. So they both get their respective altars. And then the monkey says before they get started, he says, well, we can't both pray for rain at once, because then it's not going to be clear who the rain is coming from. So you pray for rain first, and then we'll pray for rain after you do. And the king, hearing the monkey, says, yes, that's a good idea. So the Taoist monks go to pray for rain. And they have these scriptures that they read out. And then the first one is to call for wind, and it starts becoming windy. So the monkey, who has the power to duplicate his form by taking hairs, takes one hair from his back and duplicates that as himself, which he often does when he wants to sneak off somewhere. So he's got a fake body, which is one of his hairs, and then he goes up to the sky and he starts yelling at the wind god. He says, what are you doing? And the wind god says, well, he had the scripture all in order, so he had to do it. And the monkey threatens him, and he explains the whole thing about how they're in this contest. And he does the same thing with all of the subsequent gods, like the lightning god, the rain, which is brought by the 4 dragons. Now, the monkey has had some of the run-ins with dragons in previous chapters, so they recognize him. And he gets them all to ignore the scriptures that the Taoist monks are reading out, even though these are, I guess, the appropriate scriptures that are supposed to call for rain. And then, of course, the monkey gets them to give the rain down when the Buddhist monk is praying, so that the Buddhist monk wins the contest. And that's the end of that contest, and that is also the end of chapter 45. But then in chapter 46, the Taoist monks still don't want to give up. They still want some sort of revenge. So they ask for a contest with meditation to see who can meditate the best. And that's right about where I left off now, at page 1040. So I'll come back to that next week and see how the meditation contest ends up. And then the Linguistic Wars. So last time I left off at chapter 5, which is the vicissitudes of war, which is all about the theories going back and forth between Chomsky in the interpretive semantics and Lakoff in the generative semantics. Am I getting the generative semantics is Lakoff. Chomsky's group is the interpretive semantics, I believe. So, as I mentioned last week, this section is getting into the linguistic theories that go back and forth between the various different groups. And I largely left that alone in my video last week, in part because I'm just barely understanding it. So it doesn't seem to be much point in me recounting it other than to just recount what I don't understand. And 2, because it is hard to summarize. I mean, it is in itself a summary of all the research that was going on. So it would be like me giving a summary of a summary, and you really just need to read the book. Except I'll try and say a few things here, because that's what we're doing here, right? That's the point of these weekly reading vlogs, is to try and say something. So, in the sections I read for this week, there's a few things. Talk about Jackendorf, who was Chomsky's graduate student, and who put the meat on Chomsky's theories. So, these are Chomsky's post-aspects theories. So Chomsky had largely abandoned the theories that made him famous in the 1960s, the syntactic structures and the aspects, and he's going off in a different direction, but he's not really fleshed out any of his theories. And so Jackendorf has fleshed out the theories, and here's Jackendorf's new model of, as this is called, the extended standard theory. So Chomsky's work in aspects was the standard theory. And sorry, this isn't focusing, and it's all in reverse image anyways, but this is the model of how sentences are created in Jackendorf's fleshing out of Chomsky. And it's very clumsy and elegant, but the thing that author Randy Allen Harris says is Jackendorf, even though he was never able to make a nice, neat model, was very careful to just get all his ducks in a row. And I think at one point he has a quote from Jackendorf somewhere where, he admits that the picture would be prettier if all the semantic interpretation took place at a single level. So here he's got the semantic interpretation happening at multiple levels. But maintains that the facts militate against such an assumption. So there's nothing you can do. This is just the way the data works. Talks about some of the rhetorical games Chomsky is able to play or Chomsky plays. So this book, as with the first edition, I think is largely sympathetic to Chomsky, or at least is somewhat sympathetic to Chomsky. But it's not a book that is hero worshipping Chomsky by any means. The book is alleging that Chomsky fought dirty in these rhetorical battles. So the restrictiveness is one of the interesting things. So Chomsky says that the generative semantics is too encompassing of a theory. What does he say? One of the great weaknesses of the theory of transformational grammar, this is the other theory, Chomsky says, is its enormous descriptive power. Now, this seems kind of strange, and he goes on to qualify this. He says, ordinarily, one thinks of descriptive power as a virtue in science. So enormous descriptive power should be the mother of all scientific virtues. But then he says, within certain parameters, this is certainly the case. Big-time descriptive sciences like astronomy and biology earn their bacon by having enormous descriptive ranges. Now I'm going to skip over something. He says, but the parameters are extremely important because they represent the limits of the science. Astronomy is not the science of all objects with mass and weight and velocity. The objects it describes do not include 56 Chevys. Biology is not the science of all objects that consume and excrete and have inherited characteristics. The objects that it describes do not include 56 Chevys. And says linguistics is not the science of all possible symbols or symbol systems. No 56 Chevys. Now, I don't quite, as with a lot of things in this book, I get generally where he's going with that. I don't get exactly how that describes, relates specifically to the debate he's talking about with Chomsky and Lakoff, like what. So specifically how this relates, I'm a little bit lost, but I get generally what he's saying, which is my takeaway from a lot of this book. But I guess the point is that Chomsky argues that the generative semantics, or transformational grammar, which I guess is another synonym for them, is too descriptive and not restrictive enough. And the author Randy Aaron Harris points out that in order to make this accusation, he's playing a lot of dirty tricks with the data, where he's ignoring a lot of very descriptive things in his own theories and just accusing the other theory of being too descriptive, which is one of the ways he's fighting dirty here, and one of the ways which made the other side so upset. And then he details that for some pages afterwards. And then a little section on grammaticality, which I thought was interesting. It talks about how Chomsky, the other side, the generative semantics, were saying that there was a lot of data that Chomsky's grammar theories couldn't handle, like what is now known as the study of pragmatics in linguistics, which apparently at the time didn't have a name. It was apparently the study of pragmatics emerged out of this debate, which I didn't realize. And if it was in the first edition, then I must have forgotten it. So politeness markers, words like please, aren't accounted for in Chomsky's grammar theories. But then he says something interesting here, again, about the way science is done. He says, Chomsky acknowledges that the limits one puts on the study of grammar by roping off certain sections from others are necessarily arbitrary. But he is willing to live with that arbitrariness because it buys him a more manageable data set. The position is familiar in philosophy of science. We are always surrounded by more phenomena than we can use and which we decide, and must decide, to discard at any particular stage of science. But then he asks a question in the next paragraph, but how much data can one safely rope off before ending up with an unproductive, shallow framework? And this is the argument. There's also some interesting things in this section. Where was it? About just the some of the natures of scientific disputes. A couple of good quotes. Where was it? Maybe that was an earlier section here. I forget where that was. There's some interesting things about just how the Linguistic Wars is emblematic of a way a lot of these debates about scientific theories have played out, and some illustrations of that. So yeah, some interesting stuff in the reading for this week. All right, and I'm going to call that good for this week's weekly reading vlog.